Welcome to this podcast. It's making me thirsty, the number one destination for Seinfeld fans. This episode 103. Today's guest is an award-winning actress. You know her from her many amazing TV shows, films, and theater productions, including The Commish, The Dark Knight, X-Files, Mad Men, The West Wing, Men of a Certain Age, Charmed, and of course, she played Angela in the season 3 episode of Seinfeld, The Good Samaritan. Please welcome Melinda McGraw. Melinda, thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me. Hello.
We are thrilled to have Melinda on the program tonight. So Melinda, take us back. It was a long time ago, but March of '92, The Good Samaritan aired, and you
30 years ago, almost.
30 years ago.
We probably were shooting it like 30 years ago right now, because back then there was like a 4-week turnaround on the show. So
right.
It's probably like winter, of 92. That is
crazy.
Very crazy, kind of exciting and also a little galling, but because I'm 30 years.
So how did a girl from Boston end up on the set of Seinfeld? So take us back. So was there an audition process? Tell us a little bit of how you landed that role of Angela, what you remember.
So I will just tell you briefly, because I don't want to go through the whole thing, but I went to school in Vermont, and then I was accepted into a drama school in London for classical acting. So I went to the Royal Academy. I came back about 7 years later. That's where I started, and I did a lot of film, and I mean, theater, and I did a couple of little film projects. And I was like, well, I think I have to go back, because back then there wasn't a lot going on yet. There was television, and there were a few films, but it was before a Room of Her Own, and a lot of the kind of, before Helena Bonham Carter kind of brought London film into the 90s. So I came back, went to New York, didn't go that great. So after about 9 months or a year, moved out to LA, and I got a play, and then I got a pilot, and then the show was on for a little while, and then I did The Commish, and yes. I was back. Oh no, this was, I think, before I went up to do The Commish. I had I got Quantum Leap. That was my first job. So that's where I got my SAG card with Scott Bakula and Dean Stockwell. So, and then my first sitcom was Night Court. I had a couple lines.
Bull. Yeah. That was Bull.
we heard it might have been the best experience for you.
Yeah, well, it was kind of funny because he was very, I know this is your little moment in the sun or whatever. And I was like, because I was doing it so I could finish my Taft-Hartley and get my SAG card finished. And I was kind of like pulled out the old theater actress card. And I was like, well, I'm really a theater actress kind of. And much to my delight, he was a huge Shakespeare fan. And he got all excited. So then he felt bad. So it was okay. We became friends. It was just, it wasn't that bad. It was an offhanded comment. But anyway, so yes, Mark Hirschfeld, who I still love so much and is a most wonderful human being. And I was just looking at him on Facebook a couple of days ago, called me, and I think I did a pre-read. And then the callback was at Radford, and they have bungalows that were where their offices were. And I think the writer's room was upstairs, and then it was downstairs, and I was in a little waiting room. I don't remember another actress being there, maybe one, but it was Jerry in the room, Mark, and I think Larry David was in the room, and Jason Alexander was directing this episode.
Right, yes.
I don't remember if he was in the room. I'm sorry, my memory is not that great about it, but I just went in and read, and what I got from her was that she was maybe connected. this woman, Angela. I just, and I don't know if that was in the script or not. I can't remember, but she was, she was not someone to be trifled with. Right. She had people who could come to her aid if she needed help. So when she felt threatened, that was not going to be any holding back. Right. And the other character on the phone was, saying, I'm going to take your bones off and reattach them. And so there was already a rhythm in the script from that guy. Back then we did get to see the whole script. A lot of times now, sometimes not, but a lot of times now everything's so secret. You have to guess what's going on. But so there was kind of a rhythm than to her outburst later after she's, you know, confronted.
Right.
So I
The,
just remember going for it and being very scary as I thought she might be in the room.
Yeah, it's interesting because your character actually had two sides. You know, the ice cream scene with Jerry in the car. She's lovable. She's, you know, laughing. You can see a connection there, and then it switches to the old, carve my initials in your brain tissue and pluck all your body hairs out. So there was
That
like
was
this,
my scene.
yeah, this. Which did you prefer? Like you played both really well, and you know, this is a compliment, but your bad side was a little bit unlikable as opposed to the other side, which was very likable. So it was a very good switch you pulled on us, the audience. I mean, so like, was that fun to do? And like, maybe what was your funner scenes to be in?
I always look for, I think my philosophy basically about every character is not so much in real life, though everyone is complicated, but is what's their pathology and how much do they have? So, you know, what's wrong with her and how bad is it? So, you know, we all have two sides, right? But, you know, this is that character is so classic Larry David, I think, that, right, the turn. And I mean, I'm sure you guys have heard women talk about, but it's not, none of the show is exactly flattering to women. I mean, you know, every woman he meets.
Right. There's always something wrong with them. They find something to break up. Or
they're just batshit crazy. So,
right.
You know, I think that became very clear. And look, Larry David, he's the sweetest guy in the world. And, you know, incredibly warm and loving and respectful. And, but, you know, he's still doing Curb Your Enthusiasm. There's still, you know, I mean, true. Susie, the character, is absolutely insane. So, no, what I like is the turn. What I always like in a character is the turn, but especially with comedy, right? It's all about surprise. So it's really fun to be someone who, you know, he couldn't resist her just because she acted like she couldn't resist him, right? So it was just a mutual, it was one of those things, it was a chemical thing with them, I think. Yeah. And then it was super fun, but he of course, he couldn't enjoy it because he couldn't stop thinking, classic Jerry, right? He couldn't stop thinking that she crashes into this car, doesn't even know, gonna confront her, and then he gets off of that, but then he just can't let go of it because he can never let himself have the happy moments. So.
Right.
So, all right. So and you know what? I'm just curious. How do you prepare for this? I know we talked about this before the show, but you were really good friends with Michael Conway, who was in season 2 of The Statue, had an incredible role. I'm just curious, was there any advice he gave you about the show? Like, what do you know about Seinfeld? Because it was still the early years.
It was the early years. I think by the time I auditioned, it was just really getting, you know, hot. And when Michael went in, it was like something in the ether that people in town kind of knew would be a very cool get. And it was a very big deal for us that he got that. I knew everything that happened that week. He told me everything. So I definitely had an inside track. I knew about how everyone was behaving, dynamics on the set. I knew how Michael Richards took him out to lunch and and he just threw himself into it. And we were in an acting class with a wonderful acting teacher who had been a Broadway casting director named Michael Shurtleff. And he has a book, and a lot of his book is about life or death stakes in a scene. To take things to a level where the stakes are life and death. First of all, it's really good for comedy because all comedy is about pain. And he used to teach us that comedy is pain. The only difference between a tragedy and a comedy is that we're laughing at the person in pain because it isn't us. So, you know, so the pain, and of course you can see that with the setup, the stakes get higher and higher. And, you know, with Michael's character, it all pays off with Kramer really coming into his own. And that they were so smart writing that opportunity for Michael Richards in that episode with Michael the Statue to find this physical comedy. And he really kind of they really got their hands around that character, Michael.
Look at you are a great analysis of this great show. So you're a big fan, clearly.
Oh yeah. Oh yes. Oh no, I'm a big fan. But I was very aware of, and I just wanted to say as an aside, Michael is still my best friend, and when watching the podcast was funny because I was saying to you before, the fact that he still has the script and it's all curated and, you know, he has the statue and everything is so Michael. And he's a brilliant actor and he could, you know, do whatever he wanted, but he's an artist and he is an extremely talented graphic designer. So he chose to do that. But anyway, yeah, so he called me in a panic because you know, in the show he talked about getting fired because, and I remember that, and he actually came home and told me that because during a run through, Jerry kind of looked at them and he was like, oh God, he hates me, you know. But he called me like the night of the dress rehearsal because he had gone out to his, there wasn't a room for him to have a dressing room on the stage because the dressing rooms there on the stage. He was out in his trailer. He was out in his trailer and they couldn't find him. It was just for a couple of minutes, but to him, it was like the end of the world. But because it was a big deal. I mean, we knew it was a big deal. And these, you know, he had a big part and he got to be with all of them and do some really cool stuff. So I knew about like, okay, here's this guy, you know, of course he sat me down. Here's how it's going to be. Here, you know, it's going to be this energy. And, you know, Julia's a little bit this and, you know, it's a kind of a boys club but she holds her own. And you know, so I definitely had an idea. But in terms of the audition, I just prepared like you know, really, that was really just to help me not be nervous, I think, in the room. But it was the comic turn of her, you know, going, you know, hell for broke, life and death stakes, that she would have him killed if he did it. Like I played it like she was connected and she was going to get the mob after him.
Yeah, and it's funny because we were talking about this before you came on, me and Chris, that when you make that turn and when you use those lines to carve my initials in your brain tissue and pluck all your bodies, I mean, your accent comes out more. And we were kind of trying to figure out, because a lot of times when actors are yelling, maybe their accent comes out, or you specifically using it to sound more like you were connected with the kind of a thicker Boston accent.
That her real accent was coming out.
Right.
That because she kind of had this veneer, you know,
that she was keeping
everything's great,
sort of.
And this is a very high maintenance woman. I'm sure she's a pretty tough girlfriend to have. So yeah, that she was really downright scary, not just because she had a temper, but because she could back it up. Yeah, that's just a choice I made. I don't know, but yeah, that was fun.
And you mentioned earlier, I mean, this was you know, Jason Alexander directed this episode, so that was a little bit unique. I'm not sure, you know, I don't think you had any scenes with him, but I mean, obviously he directed you, so maybe you can kind of talk to what that was like, a little bit different for.
Well, I mean, it was super fun to me, but you know, when you're a guest star, I mean, you a lot of times with comedy back then, look, the business has changed so much, but back then, you know, the sitcom situation was you're in front of a live audience. We did a little pre-taping out in front of the, you know, by the car scene and stuff like that, which was a little ahead of its time, you know, to do things that were not all in that studio, right? All in that apartment. But it was pretty straightforward that you're going to try to recreate what you did in the audition. You know, you have the read through. And sometimes people get fired from the read-through. You know, if you don't get the laughs, and I know Suzanne, you had Suzanne Cryer on, and that's exactly right. It's like you've got to get every laugh that those writers wrote, and when you do the read-through for them, when their joke comes up, man, they're laughing loud, and that you got to make sure that you're hitting it. So when the network comes in, you are making your job is to make the writing, you know, even better. That's your job as an actor in television. It's to make the writing, and when it has to deliver, and you have something like Seinfeld, which is so precise. It's farce. It's, you know, not really satire. It's more farce. There's a farce energy to it, but it really has its own. It really created its own kind of farce. That a lot of people have tried to, you know, emulate. And sometimes I mean, there are things like there are elements like in Veepin and other shows I've just used because I'm thinking of her, but it did change comedy in so many ways. But it was broad because, you know, to have a character like Kramer, it's very hard to imagine a character like that on a smart show. Again, I mean, it's amazing the umbrella they were able to make of really smart and really dumb and everything in between. So the show about nothing, which is, again, it's so Larry David and it's so Jerry Seinfeld, you know. But they, you know, I want to say something about Jerry, who was, well, let me get back to Jason. It was interesting because it was his first time. And whenever there's an actor who's directing, who's on a show. And if I'd ever been on a show for years and years, I definitely would have asked if I could have a shot at directing while on that show. And I was also directed by Helen Hunt in Mad About You, or was she just, maybe she was just following the director. But there's definitely a different energy.
Right.
They have to hand over the reins to the actor, and the actor, we're always trying to prove ourselves, and then you're also in it. So I think, it was my only time, so I don't have anything to compare it to, but I have a feeling it was a little bit of a different energy than some of the other,
Right.
And that scene with when I did go after him, we did do a few different ways, and we did try some different things to really try to get it where they wanted. And I was a little worried that maybe they weren't quite so happy with what I was doing, but we just, Jason worked with me and we just kept doing it. And he was great. He's adorable. I mean, he's a wonderful person. I've known him for years after that and see him at charity things. And he's a very generous person and a real actor, Jerry was very humble and very, I'm not really an actor, just like Michael said, but he was so sweet and so generous. And I actually thought he was a good actor. I mean, he smiled a lot at what he's doing. Larry David does exactly the same thing when he's acting. He can't help himself. They're always about to crack up. I just think they think life is funny and it's kind of part of what they're playing.
Right.
But the really sweet thing that I'll never forget in terms of doing the show with Jerry is in front of the audience. We did the scene with the ice cream in the car with the live audience. And he went before the scene because he would come out and do some of the warm up, before the show. Before that scene, he asked for a mic and he spoke directly to the audience. And because I was his first on-screen kiss ever.
Really? I think, yeah, you're right.
And I had a couple already, so it wasn't my first, but I was, very aware that it was embarrassing. It can be really embarrassing, and especially when it's your first one. But he said, if anyone makes a ooh sound, I'm going to be not happy. He said it in a gentle way, but he was very clear that please don't do that. Please don't do that, because it would really take him out of the, because it's super embarrassing, and it is super embarrassing. And I think there's something kind of that wasn't that kind of show,
It's not Melrose Place,
Yeah,
it's,
yeah, and it's not a teeny bopper sitcom, it wasn't Urkel, it was, those shows, there's always oh, whenever someone kisses, it's not Full House, this is something else. And so please, don't do that. So he was shy, in that way, and incredibly respectful. And I remember one time I was walking back to my car off the lot, and he stopped in his car and offered me a lift and gave me a ride to the parking lot, and he was just a real sweet guy, super gentleman and really encouraging. And the same with Julia. I mean, absolutely encouraging, sweet, so menschy. I mean, they were all just really menschy.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it's been consistent. Everyone we spoke to, it's kind of, they like to get our shine, make them feel so welcome. So it's funny, you mentioned Jason Alexander, he was directing. You also mentioned Larry. I mean, we've asked about the directors on the show a lot, and a lot of the actors are it's kind of Larry, just, he's running everything. I'm assuming he was super involved, or was he kind of taking a step back because this was Jason's first director role? It's Larry's role on set.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of felt to me that it was Larry was the guy kind of standing in the back, and Jerry was his second. It kind of felt like that. Felt very much like something they were doing together in a way. And so, so I think then having Jason there, it might have been a little different that time. But I was just aware of them kind of in the back. But they were, obviously, if you're directing, you're going to be talking. Larry's the showrunner. You're going to be talking to the showrunner. It's always the showrunner who's the boss, who's the writer, usually the head writer. So ultimately, it has that boss energy. And directing, I've worked with some of the great sitcom directors, Andy Ackerman. I mean, and there's just they help you land those things, but it's a writer's medium, the comedy.
You couldn't escape Seinfeld. You work with Ackerman as well. So we actually spoke with Ann Tallman, who was on this show as well.
Yes, well, yes, of course.
Yeah, so I'm just curious, when love happened on the set, did you pick up on any of that? I'm curious, just the vibe on the set.
Well, here's the interesting thing about Michael. He will come up to he came up to me and sat down and started asking me all these questions. So I wasn't sure if he was flirting or he was just being nice.
Yeah.
And I think that he is really nice with everyone. So he was talking to Ann, he was talking to me, he was talking to, the guy, he was talking to everybody, the guy. My memory's terrible, I'm so sorry. But so I didn't particularly notice anything going on. And I hope this isn't talking out of school, but I think it was the night of the show. Ann said, hey, Michael asked me for a drink or something. And I don't know if I want to go alone. Will you come with? And I was like, and that's when I kind of knew. And I was like, okay, I'll come with. But like at a certain point, it was like, I think it's time for me. But I was kind of kept checking in, like, what's the baddie language? And I couldn't tell. It was like she was very close to her best. So, but I was like, I thought, well, if I make a move to go, then she'll either also or she won't. And she didn't. So I was like, okay, good. So, she's over that. So that's when I knew it was really at the end. But he is so sincerely curious and interested in your process and what you've done before, and would you like to work on this? Do you want me to run this with you? I mean, and always working, never sitting down, or when he was chatting, it was very directed. He's just an incredibly hardworking. He was incredibly hardworking actor to watch. It was fascinating.
We have heard that a lot. That's great to hear. That's funny that you were there at the when the sparks were flying. It'd be remiss. You mentioned working with Andy Ackerman. You also mentioned Helen Hunt earlier. I mean, you worked with some real legends in television. With Kelsey Grammer, John Goodman, Ray Romano, a lot of these people. Brett Garrett, Larry Miller. But Seinfeld was one of your earlier roles, jobs. Did you notice when you kind of moved on to these other West Wing, these bigger Mad Men, these bigger kind of shows? We always like to hear kind of the difference between, you're there season 3 of Seinfeld, but I'm assuming it was still sort of that well-oiled machine we hear so much about, and how you mentioned earlier, they were groundbreaking. They were also, very professional on set, it sounds like. But I'm just curious if you kind of picked up anything from working on Seinfeld that you kind of took with you later on in your career, because you did work on Seinfeld rather early.
Absolutely. I think what's interesting is shows are different and sitcoms are run differently. And I've been on several sitcoms and worked with Diane English. And yes, I think that Seinfeld probably helped me the most with the Gary Shandling, the Larry Sanders Show. And I did an episode of that where I played his girlfriend. And because when you're working with someone who's a comedian first, and oh my gosh, Gary Shandling was always saying, I'm not an actor. I'm like, oh, he was such a wonderful actor, heartbreaking. But with him, with that show, we could improv. It was different. It was just a different kind of flow, but definitely working closely, and also in the romantic kind of relationship in the show with a comedian. It helped me with that show a lot. I think it helped me get confidence, and it all builds one after the other. Work begets work, and part of that is because you get more confident. I did a movie with Leslie Nielsen. It was gonna be like the new Naked Gun series, and so I was the Priscilla Presley type, I guess, character. And that was, that had challenges. It's, first of all, it was an old-fashioned thing, and he had his way of working, and he was quite a bit older. And, that I think that the experience, when you work with people who are kind of at the top of their game or cresting, or really having, those moments, and or becoming famous, like working on the X-Files during that time. That was the second year when they started to really, Mad Men, the second year when things started really, there, having had experience on those things, it definitely helps you gird the professional loins, because there's a lot going on under the surface, and a different kind of anxiety happens. It's a joy when things start to hit and people are so happy that what the work they're doing is being received and understood and celebrated. But then there also is this burden of fame, which is new, which is never what people think it's going to be. And I have observed a lot of people become quite famous quickly. And there's not a lot of people that enjoy it. I have some friends who once said that are famous, and they said the only person that they knew who enjoyed it was George Clooney. And I think part of the reason that is that he waited a long time. Like he was, I think, at my age, if it happened to me now, I'd probably love every second of it, because I've already been through every up and down. I've been so close to these things and been through it. It's such a roller coaster. So I think if something went well, I would totally know this is so temporary and I'm just going to enjoy it. And there are people who are so crazy for X-Files, or so crazy for Mad Men, or so crazy for Quantum Leap. They'll come up to me and I'm like, I love talking. I will talk to them for as long as whatever. But when you're, on a show that becomes part of the zeitgeist, like say Friends, and you can't go anywhere, it can be very difficult. And it's not surprising that those people become very close, because no one else is experiencing it in that way that they are. Like Desperate Housewives, it happened. Like it can just happen. Now it's a little bit different because there's so much more content, but you can see it still happens, right? Succession or Ozark or whatever is Euphoria. Like but the flame kind of comes and then it dies a little faster.
Right.
So it's different, but then you have to understand, well, you do understand, but I have to remind myself that there was 4 channels. I mean, when the X-Files came out on Fox on Friday night at 9:00, we were all sitting down. We all rushed home to watch the X-Files. There were massive parties. Fox was like a new network still, right? Yeah. And so these things were mega. So Seinfeld was a effing big deal, and millions of people were watching it, right?
And what's interesting though is and for our money, you were in season 3. Season 3 and 5 are our favorites. Flip a coin. I mean, they're just, I don't know. They just stayed true to the show. But the ratings, right? For instance, this episode did 16 million. Good number, but it was a Wednesday night. And then as the show got kookier, the Muffin Tops, in season 8 or whatever, did like 35 million. So it didn't, for our money, like the core of the show was definitely the early years. And that's why we love talking to people that were there in the beginning, like you. But you made some just incredible points right there. But back to Seinfeld, that episode, were there any, again, it's 30 years ago, but were there any scenes that got cut were there any scenes that got cut that didn't make it, you wish made it? I'm just curious, anything you remember from that week that kind of didn't make the cut because, they have to truncate all this great writing into only 22 minutes.
I just like to watch stuff I wasn't in. I always like to watch stuff I'm not in. So if I don't have to be doing a change, so back then you would do any pre-taping, so we did the ice cream, the talking about going to get a cappuccino outside before. And then everything else we shot that night. So if I didn't have to be back changing, I would go by the side, and the network people had a room. And so they were watching upstairs and they could then come down in between if they wanted to give notes. And then everyone's on the floor. So you have bleachers this is for most people have never been to a live taping, but it's really exciting. It's like the opening night on Broadway. It's usually a Friday night or a Tuesday night. The bleachers are full. And the day before, you've done a dress rehearsal and you maybe have shot the whole show with no audience. But what they want is they want the scenes that are in front of the audience, because that your game goes up, right? The adrenaline goes up, your game goes up. So you come out, you're introduced, you start the show, and they show back the clip of Jerry's monologue, whatever he's doing, and then you go right into the first scene, like in the diner, it's him and Jerry or whatever. And so if I could, I would stand on the sides so I could see what was going on, if I could see into that set and watch the monitor, because I want to hear, I want to feel like in a theater, a live show, it has, even though you're doing it for those 16 million and for you, and for now for posterity, it has a life that's live. And so I'm always out there trying to see, no matter what show I'm doing, like sitcom I'm doing, because you want to jump into the rope on the right thing, and you want to go out there and nail it on the first take. So the second take is a gimme, and then they can come in and they have a little joke, they have a little pitch. So the writers are there pitching to Larry, and then Larry says to the director, we're going to do this. Then the director comes over with the sides and say, we're going to try this. And so that's, you try to get all that in front of the audience. So we did that, and usually do each scene twice. And then if you're going to do what are called pickups, you let the audience go after, yay, and you were great. And then you go into scenes that they may want extra angles on, or they just thought could be a little better. So we did stay. I think we did stay and work on the scene where I ball them out. I can't remember what else stayed, but we did.
Well, I'll give you the line if you don't mind repeating it. I'll pluck all your body hairs out with my teeth. Can you play that back in your Angela voice, or?
I'll pluck all your body hairs out with my teeth.
Yeah.
That's perfect. Yeah, I was going to ask you about
like that sounds like a
and you had your hand out. I mean, you definitely had that.
She had that neck. I wanted her to have that neck.
Is that
a different?
Is that Boston? Like, is that like a Boston?
I tried to do a Brooklyn. Well, I had been living in Brooklyn. I tried to do like a Brooklyn, but like. But maybe some Boston came out. I never had a Boston accent. My mom's from Texas. My parents were from Texas. So I never really, and we moved there when I never really had the Boston thing, but so I did what I thought would be this tough girl. And maybe she was, related also to some Boston family, some Bonanos or something. I don't know. But
there were some great lines. I mean, you mentioned earlier, even the guy that wanted to get George says, I'll sew your ass to your face.
Reattach it.
Yeah, reattach it. I mean, all these lines.
That is so funny. That's to me so Larry David. Like I read that script, I'm like, he hasn't changed. Like his humor is exactly the same. That is so. I mean, I could see that line in Curb Your Enthusiasm this season. Like he would get a character and make them say that. He would make Susie say that in that.
Right.
Know?
And that's what's
But Peter Melman, look, I don't know if Peter Melman may have written that lane. Who, by the way, I have to tell you, Peter Melman, who is the best. He's just the best. But I was on another friend of mine's Facebook who wrote a beautiful spiritual post about Ram Dass and how there was this synchronicity, and he ran into a man on the street, an older man on the street who was lost and had some memory problems, and he didn't remember where he lived. And so he had happened to be taking a walk, and so he and his wife figured out where he lived and got him home, and his wife was there waiting for him. And he said this beautiful Ram Dass quote, we're all just walking each other home in the end, or whatever. And Peter Melman and everyone was like, oh, this is so sweet. This is such a beautiful story. And Peter Melman just went on him and he wrote, I have a wife. And I just wrote, I love you. Because I mean, he's just like, he's the only person I know that would read this beautiful story about this lost old man and pretend to be that. I mean, it was just to make a joke like that and not say anything sentimental. It's just so him. And it just.
We love Melman. No, it's funny. Sentimental. I asked him like
sense of humor.
Yeah, I told him I was upset that they killed off Susan, and Melman said that was his favorite part of the show. I said, okay.
Exactly.
That's his thing.
So classic. No, he's wonderful and awesome.
So yeah,
So
you a unique thing.
I mean, we made friends during that show. I mean, he was around all the time, and because when your name is on that episode, and I don't know how they worked in that writing room. I don't have the ins. You guys, I'm sure you know more.
Yeah, there really was no writing room, especially with Melman. He definitely wrote on his own. It was pretty much.
Okay, so then he was responsible for most of that.
Typically, they brought this to Larry, and they, Larry and Jerry would kind of, put lipstick, if you will, yeah.
Well, I could see Melman writing that whole thing and them just being like, yeah. I mean, like he understood the rhythm so well. I mean, it was just a perfect match. I mean, it was one of those things that just doesn't happen. I mean, I think the only reason the third season didn't have those 36 million is because they kept yanking the freaking thing around the schedule.
Yeah, it was a little harder to find.
Doing 6, saying they're not going to do it. They didn't get it. They didn't know what to do with it. And, for a long time, like we all used to say that show would never be made. I think now it would, but it would have been HBO or it would have been, so it would have had a shot now, except on the other hand, it's possible that it laid the groundwork for all these new shows to be, for even a Netflix to happen, or, and being able to have these kinds of, satires and, well, it's not even a satire, it really is a farce.
Yeah, I mean, it's absurd. It definitely especially the later seasons is definitely absurd.
Well, what's great for me, how old are your kids? Are your kids old enough to watch it?
Yeah, some of the episodes. I mean, they're not old enough to watch a lot of them, but I always forget too because I tell them about every episode. They obviously know to do the podcast. They're 10 and 8 and so, or 9 and 7, and so they'll always ask, can I watch that episode? And like, I'll turn it on and then I'll remember like, oh, wait a minute. This is when, something happens at Elaine or there's and I'm like, okay, you can't watch this episode. Sorry. But they can watch some of them, but they're not quite there to watch.
I think they would prefer Angela. My kids would like you yelling. That would be pretty funny.
Well, they might like the sneezing. Well, I just want to tell you pardon me, before I get to the Helen Slater. Oh my gosh, angel on earth.
Becky Gelke.
Becky Gelke. What a great name. I want to name a dog Gelke. I think it's just the great word.
Real name we found out, right? Ohio,
it's someone's real name.
Yeah.
What was I talking about? Oh, my daughter's 19 and she's going to film school and she had never seen it. And so when I told her I was going to be this product, I said, and we were feeling kind of blue. It was a couple of weeks ago and she was home. And so I put on Seinfeld, watched the first 3 episodes from the pilot. And I haven't seen her laugh that hard. I mean, it holds up. So it's so timeless and it holds up so well. She laughed so hard. And in 10 years, it's going to be no different with your kids. I don't think. I just think it was just, a mystical synchronicity that all these people came together at that time in that moment. That's why there's the thing called the zeitgeist. Like, it just was the perfect moment for that. And now it is just, it's like almost an anthropological, thing in the gestalt of like who we are in American entertainment, and not just American entertainment, in not just comedy, but all entertainment. There is this Seinfeld canister.
What did she like? I'm just curious, like from a 19-year-old, like what, Friends, I get the relationship stuff, blah, 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 but like Seinfeld's a different
from
animal.
His, what's the deal? I mean, everything, to me, it's almost the Ionesco-y absurd theater, like that everything he says is pointing out the obvious, the things that's right in front of our face that we don't see. That's why he's so brilliant. That's why he was successful.
Yeah, and that's why they say it's a show about nothing, but it really it is about everything, It's
like about everything. It's about what it is he was mindful about things that the rest of us just walk over, right? Like, he's pointing out the more, and when you think about that, oh my God, that is ridiculous. That's hilarious that human beings do that. I mean, he's a sociologist. Really. Yeah. And so there's a lot of, I mean, I don't want to sound too whatever, but I think things that end up being timeless like that, there's a philosophy in it. He is a philosopher. I mean, you can watch Jerry Seinfeld now when he's doing the, coffee with comedians in cars and other, he does talk. I mean, he'll say it isn't. They'll say it isn't deep. But there is, of course, it's deep to reflect on the culture, because that's how we look at ourselves and say, what are we making important And why are we all agreeing to that? You know?
Yeah.
And that is where we are right now. And it was a moment before, I mean, obviously, like, you know, they're dealing with this group of men dealing with women. And then
Right.
Elaine happens to be one of their friends who's a woman dealing with being a woman and dealing with men. But I mean, there's a lot of sexual dynamics in it and economic dynamics in it. And I mean, I definitely think that weird baby boomer to Gen X kind of, it was a weird, we were becoming aware there was punk and then it was after punk and it was the beginning of rap. And it was, you know, it was just a really strange time, the early 90s and the 90s.
Yeah.
And I think that's true of the X-Files too. There's like some, you know, it's not just for sentimentality's sake. I think there's some like cultural truths in there that make it timeless, besides the great writing and the, you know, the great acting. But
Yeah, it's very well said. It's timeless, and it's the only thing that changes. I said this. We were actually just talking to an author who wrote a book about the '90s, Chuck Klosterman, and we were talking about how Seinfeld defined the decade, and it really you just kind of summarized that very well, actually, because nothing changes except the technology, but the relationships and how we interact, and like you just mentioned, the man and woman relationships that they talk about, and especially the earlier seasons 1 through 5 with the Larry Charles episodes and Larry David episodes.
yeah.
They're very deep. They are. It's very existential, and there's a lot going on there. So that was well said.
Well, and it's their isolation too, you know, this kind of like, am I crazy or is this, why should this be easier? Like to find someone who'll just say, you love me and I'll love you. Should it be this complicated? and you know, why is just having an apartment so like a Rubik's Cube, like just adulting, what we call adulting now, right? You know, and so it's just so funny to be, it was such a relief, I think, to be able to look at people go, oh, look, they're really having a problem getting their shit together too. I'm not the only one who's like, do I call her? Do I not call her? Do I this? Do I that? You know, she should have left a note. I should do the right thing, but I want to go get coffee with her and she's hot. And do I do, you know, it's just.
Yeah, I mean, that episode had it all, just from the simplicity of like the show at its core also is about friendship and kind of guys connecting and talking about everything. We said nothing, but like, you know, you went on the date with them and you would touch him and, you know, George says, why do we love that? And they just say, let's not even analyze it, right? Let's not even get into it.
Let's not even get into it. So great. Such a great one. And you're like, yeah, let's not.
So speaking of great lines, and you mentioned a second ago, Becky Gelke, what can you tell us about Helen Slater?
Okay, that was, no one knew. They did not tell us. They told no one. And so that was a total surprise. I think it's funny because you guys, I'm sure, have seen like articles or read reviews or whatever, how when they analyze this episode, they're like, well, the casting crew and the writers were really hoping that after a sneeze, you know, you are so good looking, would catch on, like yada, yada. But I don't know, because when he says it if you haven't seen the episode, so George goes on a date with Elaine and this married couple, and Ann Tolman's character, Beth, well, I can't remember the name of her character. I don't know. She sneezes and her husband doesn't say anything. And George says, Gesundheit. And she said, well, thank you. Or they make a big deal about how saying God bless you is so great. And so they have a conversation about and say, we should say you are so good looking. Wouldn't that be nice? And so he decides that the woman that I hit is this woman that he's had a crush on for years, Becky Gelke. And he goes to her apartment to let her know that that he saw the whole thing or whatever. And she answers the door and sneezes. And he says, you are so good looking, because it was in his head. And she closes the door in his face. So to me, the whole thing was, that's a bad idea. So why did they think they wanted it to catch on? Because it was a real guy was fired from his job months after that aired for saying that to someone in the workplace.
Oh yeah, I do vaguely remember
sexual
that.
harassment.
Yeah, for like sexual.
Which
yeah.
Which I think is such a Seinfeld, just a beautiful Seinfeld, like chef's kiss. You know, what they were trying to send up is that you probably shouldn't go around saying You are so good looking to every random woman that sneezes. But
Yeah, that was the beauty of the show, right? They pulsed on things that were happening in real time, and if it was funny, it was funny. So it definitely worked. I mean, oh, Melinda, this has been such a treat. We cannot thank you enough. I mean,
thank you so much,
Angela.
Angela,
What's better than Angela?
Where is Angela now? I have my ideas.
Tell us about like what are you up to now? I mean, your career has been unbelievable.
Oh, I think she's on Real Housewives of Long Island. I think she.
Angela.
That's what Angela's up to.
She has, a son-in-law who's into this, and she's got she may not have a shoe store, but she's got her own.
With that flower dress and everything. Yeah.
She's bringing the 90s back with the flower dresses. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Incredible.
Well, you guys, the podcast is great, and I'm so glad you're keeping the love alive.
Thank you.
And have a great time. Enjoy your kids this age. It's so much fun.
Thank you. And hey, we're glad that is your daughter listening to the podcast? Did you get her to be
I will make sure she does. And she'll watch Mike's too. She'll get interested. The more Seinfeld she watches, the more she'll want to listen probably from the beginning of the whole thing. And so will I. So
awesome. Thank you so much.
I'm late to the party. Thanks, you guys, for reaching out. Take care.
Thanks so much, Melinda.
Bye.